Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishna is Erevin, Perek Vav, Chapter 6, Mishna Zai, Mishna 7. Okay. Now, we've already mentioned previously that members of one household only have to contribute one Erev. Okay. So if you're living with your parents, so it's not like your parents have to contribute to the Erev and you got to contribute to the Erev. Mm-hmm. You're all part of one household, and there's one contribution per household. Now the Mishnah has the following case like this: Ha'achim v'hashutafim. The brothers, the partners, which really has to be translated as the brothers or partners. Shahayu oichan al shulchan avihem, who are eating by the table of their father, or in the case of the partners, these are partners, they're people who are working together for someone in a chutzner, in a courtyard, and they are eating on his table, on their employer's table. The Mishnah keeps the case pretty much about the brothers and the father, but the point is the same as about the employers who are eating by their employer, the employees eating by their employer, and these guys are working together and they're eating by their employer. The yeshena bebatayim, but they're sleeping in their own houses. Each one needs to contribute to the Erev. So again, the case of the Mishnah seems to be a case. You've got brothers that are eating by their father, right? What's the wording? They're eating at the table of their father, but they're sleeping at home. So they eat by their father, they sleep at home. The Mishnah says, well, if you're sleeping at home, then you're considered your own household, even though you're eating by your father, and you have to separately contribute to the Erev. But that's not pshat. That's not the halacha. Even though the Mishnah says the words they're eating by their father's table, it does not literally mean they're eating by their father's table. Because if they actually were eating by their father's table, it was a situation where they are eating in their father's home. They just sleep somewhere else. They would be considered part of that household. And they wouldn't have to separately contribute just because they're sleeping separately in a separate house. What it means is, in this case, eating off the table means they're supported. That means the father gives them their food. But they take their food home, they eat it there, and they sleep there. And the same thing in the case of the workers. The guys working together from one person in this chutzner, in this courtyard. Here too, they get their food from him, but they're not actually eating in his house. So that's the case here where we say that each one needs their own Erev, even though they get their food from their father, but they're not actually eating there, but they get their food even though they get their food from their father, and they are sleeping, and they sleep somewhere else, which means they're really eating and sleeping in a separate place. That's when we say each one has to contribute separately to the Erev. If they'd be actually eating by their father and sleeping somewhere else, they would be considered his father's house. They're part of the father's household, and would only need one, and there would be one contribution to the Erev from that household. Lefikach, therefore, the Mishnah continues, in this case, where we say each one needs to contribute separately to the Erev, where one of them to forget and not participate in the Erev, he's going to have to abandon his rights in the chutzner so that the other people can use it. Because as we said before, if an Erev Chatzeres was made, but one member of the chutzner did not participate, he actually messes up the Erev unless he is maval to rishus, unless he abandons his rishus to the other people. So therefore, if any of these sons who has their own place forgets to participate in the Erev, in order for the rest of the people to carry in the Erev, they're going to have to abandon their rights in the chutzner. Masai, when do we say this? Meaning this halacha that each one under these circumstances has to contribute separately. That's where the Erev is taken somewhere else. When an Erev Chatzeres is made, as we said before, everybody contributes some food, some bread, and where does the bread go? Into one person's house. And by going into one person's house, it's considered symbolically as if everybody is living there, and therefore the house and the chutzner is all considered one domain. But the point is that the food is going to land up by one person's house. Now, if the house is that the Erev is landing up in is a house other than their father's, So that's when we say this whole halacha that where they're sleeping and taking their food home, that they have to contribute to the Erev separately. But if the Erev was coming to them, and to them here means, if let's say the Erev was kept in their father's house. We'll explain that soon. Or there's no one else living in this chutzner besides the father and his children, who take their food from the father and eat at home. In these cases, they do not need to participate in an Erev. Now let's take each case. The first case was that where the Erev is kept by the father, then Mishna is saying they don't have to contribute separately towards the Erev. Why is that? That's because the halacha is that if the Erev is kept in your house, you don't have to contribute towards it. Because the whole point is that by everybody contributing bread to the house, everybody's living there. That's what it's considered. Well, if you're living there anyway, you don't need to contribute because you're living there. It's your house. In the case where it's the father who's holding the Erev, and he doesn't have to participate in the Erev, that is enough to help his sons to say that they don't have to participate in the Erev either because they get their food from him. Meaning, we're going to, this part of the Mishnah is telling us that the fact that they take the food from the father, in the first half of the Mishnah says, doesn't help you because they need to participate in the Erev separately because they're not eating there. Just getting the food's not enough. But this half of the Mishnah tells us that getting the food works somewhat. And it works enough, meaning it works somewhat to say that they are part of the father's household. So in a situation where they are getting the food from the father and the father doesn't have to participate in the Erev because the Erev is being stored in his house, just like he doesn't have to go ahead and participate, they don't have to participate. I guess, maybe the pshat, I'm just thinking right now, since, again, he supports them, right? He gives them their food. Well, if he doesn't have to give the food towards the Erev, then, he doesn't have to give the food to them either. They're part of his, eating. They're part of his, again, this means they're part of his household for as far as this. As far as this, that once the father doesn't have to contribute, that will cover them. They are enough part of his household because he's feeding them for that to work. And so to the other part of the Mishnah that says that if nobody else is living there, you don't need an Erev. As we said, you have to have two Jews living in a chutzner to say that now you need an Erev Chatzeres. Now, in this case, we've got more than two Jews, right? But it's all one happy family. At the end, they're one family, and not just one family. That wouldn't just be enough. The point is that they get their food from him. He feeds them. In that situation where he feeds them, even though they're not eating by him, they are enough a part of his household to say, you don't need an Erev here. They're not going to create a new obligation of Erev just because of the fact that they don't actually eat there and sleep separately. The fact that they are getting their food from him makes them be considered enough of his household to say that if it's only them in the chutzner, that's not going to create an obligation for an Erev Chatzeres. That's not going to forbid the usage of the Erev Chatzeres. It's not considered different people enough to need an Erev Chatzeres. The fact that he feeds them is enough to say that they are part of his household enough that there's just one household here regarding needing an Erev Chatzeres. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Okay, it's after